Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Claire.
And our greatest loss has been not being able to have children.
So we're grieving the loss of something we never actually had in the first place. Welcome to the Silent Why podcast. Today's episode is a little different because for the full episode you get just the two of us.
This episode will hopefully explain where our mission to find 101 types of loss all started, with our experience of loss.
We sat down together to honestly and openly talk about our childless journey and the strange, confusing grief of losing something that we never had.
Now, because I'm the radio guy, I got to ask my wife the questions about our journey so far, but then we also asked our best friends to anonymously submit some questions for us to answer.
These were questions directly about us, or questions that they were curious about on the wider subject, or maybe things that they'd like to ask any couple going through infertility or childlessness.
And I wasn't even allowed to see them beforehand.
No, well, me neither, although I did scan them for duplicates because I was a bit curious. But I wanted our answers to be as real and as fresh as possible.
Let's hope it worked.
Anyway, the thing is, the questions were so good that the episode ended up being too long. So we've split it into two parts.
So this is episode 3, part 1, where we talk about our journey so far. Then part 2, next week, will be us answering the submitted questions. We're recording.
We are!
Right. The floor is mine. Question time. Before we delve back into the past, the last sort of 10, 11 years, let's just briefly look at the future. So what's an average week look like for you?
Currently, it's a lot of podcast work because this is one of our early episodes that we're releasing. So I'm trying to get that off the ground. But I'm also a writer. So I have written my first novel and I'm looking to try and get that out to agents. And I've got another one I want to write as well. So it's all quite creative at the moment. Not a lot of income, but doing things I really enjoy, which is nice. So that's most of my week.
And baking.
And baking. I do love baking.
That's one of my favourite things you do.
I do love
baking. Thank you
yeah.
for that. And I work in public service broadcasting. That's radio production here in Gloucestershire. So that's a local service in England. I've done so for a couple of decades now. And there's two of us living alone in our fairly big house. We've had a few pets over the years, a big Weimaraner dog who was great called Buzz. We've had a chameleon recently. All these pets have gone too soon, which are other little losses, aren't they?
That's a future episode.
Future episodes, certainly pets. And really loving being on this podcasting journey and actually doing what I do in my day job at home with you as well.
It's so easy working together as a married couple.
It is, yeah. Learning is a hobby, isn't it? An interest. Okay, how long have we been together?
So we've been together since 2002.
It's like a quiz.
Yeah, but married since 2005. So you can do the maths on that one.
Have you been revising beforehand, or do you just know those dates that confidently?
I know those dates. I can't quite, if people say how long have you been married, I have to try and quickly do the maths from 2005.
So nearly 20 years together.
Nearly 20, yeah.
Okay. Did you imagine that one day we would have a family together?
Yeah, when we first met, I think we both did. You were quite keen, I think, to have children. I remember you talking about that, so I think that was something that was quite key. And I think I just always assumed I would. I wasn't one of those women who was desperate for babies, wanting to meet a guy so I could have a family. That was never a goal of mine. I kind of just take life as it comes day to day. But I think there was definitely the assumption that there would be one day children that I had with a man that I met and loved, and that would be the next step of our journey. Didn't even consider it wouldn't happen.
No, it was one of those things that we just assume, isn't it? Our upbringing, the culture that we live in, the society pressures, all that sort of stuff. You just assume that one day, 3 or 4 years after being married, you would start the family. And I was really excited about that. Yeah, I love being around kids at all ages, love playing, love having fun. So yeah, certainly always could see myself as being a dad and look forward to being a dad. And that was never really something I had cause to question until... How long ago do you remember when this whole infertility thing started?
It was 2010.
Okay, 11 years. And do you remember how that news was broken to us?
I do, yeah. So I remember probably about 2 years before thinking that we would see if we could have a family, just see what came next. We'd just let things happen naturally and we assumed it would happen at some point, and it hadn't happened. And I think we were starting to question it a little bit, but hadn't thought about it in depth. We were still, mid-20s at this point, so I didn't feel like there was a hurry. And then you were chatting to your brother on the phone, I remember which house we were living in because we were in the lounge, and he was training in medicine, and he had found out somehow that an operation that you had when you were younger might have the impact of leaving you infertile. And that was new information for you. And then you mentioned it to me. I don't think there was no panic or anything about it. I don't think that freaked us out. We just thought, oh, we better go and get some tests done. Maybe that's why it hasn't been straightforward. And that was what started us on getting tests. And then the first test confirmed that we had about a 5% chance of conceiving because you were largely infertile. I mean, it was still possible, but it was a very small percentage.
Yeah, it didn't hit home, did it, really? I couldn't even tell you when it did hit home. I think, I was always really thankful, right way back to day one, that you were always really supportive and understanding and never, ever made me feel under any pressure or any shame in that at all, because it's quite a difficult thing for a lot of guys that are in the same boat that feel a bit embarrassed if they're not fertile. It can be a big weight on a guy's shoulders. But for me, thankfully, you were someone that always kept that weight off my back, never applied pressure or whatever. So yeah, really thankful for that. And then that began, I guess, the last 11 years of processing, of journeying, of exploring different options.
Yeah, well, we were put forward for IVF straight away. Here in the UK, it depends what postcode you live in as to how many options of IVF you get offered on the NHS. We didn't have to have the whole trying for a year thing, even though we've been trying for longer because of your condition. And I remember us having the appointment with the consultant and then just leaving that meeting and just looking at each other and just thinking, this doesn't feel like the right path for us. Our gut feeling was like, this doesn't feel right. And we were still young, so I think we thought, well, we've still got time to try naturally. We don't have to necessarily go into this, when they describe all the injections and the hormones and everything you need to go through and, the surgeries and things. It felt a bit overwhelming at the time, I think. So we thought, well, let's just see what happens naturally. So we didn't pursue it then, knowing we could go back if we wanted to. And then we just looked at lots of other things in between. So we looked at adoption and fostering, egg donation, sperm donation, natural IVF, surrogacy, embryo adoption, everything else that's out there really. And it's a minefield for people who want to conceive but can't. So we did a lot of that on our own. And just worked out what we felt comfortable with and tended to find that where I felt comfortable in one area, it was something you weren't as keen on, and where you felt comfortable in another area, it was something I wasn't so keen on. And because we wanted to stay together as a couple, and that was always our priority, to stay together on decisions and to make sure we were moving forward together, because we knew this journey had the potential to get between us. We'd seen other couples go through that strain, and we know it can separate people when they can't have children. So we wanted to be together on it, and I think that it helped us in some ways, I think, because it narrowed down our options, but it also complicated things sometimes.
We both love admin, so the thought of doing research and studying all these different options didn't really faze us, and gathering information, writing it down and talking about it. What were some of the many ways that we did explore adoption, fostering, IVF, sperm donation? What was the reality of what that looked like?
Well, with adoption and fostering, we didn't follow it that far through the processing, but we did meet with parents that had adopted children, and we spoke to them about what that was like, from people who had taken on very young children to people who had taken on slightly older children. I think we were at different ends as to which we'd prefer. It felt like, to me, it wasn't about wanting to be a parent when you adopt, it was more about wanting to look after a child. I feel like it's changed nowadays to what it used to be. If it had been back in the olden days when babies were just given away because their parents weren't married, like you see on long lost family programs, I think we would have probably just taken in 2 or 3 babies, straight away. But the reality was, by the time we were looking at it, we were a little bit older, heading towards late 20s, and we tended to get the impression that we would have been given children we would have naturally had at that age, which would have been slightly older, and it was harder to get babies. So I don't think we were thinking, let's take on a 3, 4, 5-year-old that's been through a hard time. We were more thinking we just liked, the idea of being parents, and it was a lot to weigh up. I remember it being very confusing. And then we decided that wasn't going to be the journey for us. And I think adoption is put on the table a lot for people who can't have children as a backup option, and it's really not. It's a very different decision. It's a very different option, and I think it's an option that everybody should consider. It's not just for people who can't have children. And it just wasn't the option for us. And I remember very vividly us sitting in a restaurant, having thought about it a lot individually, and then we were going to come together and have a conversation are we going to push forward with adoption? And we sort of hesitantly said, I don't know who went first. I'm not sure that I feel strong enough or comfortable enough to do this. And the other one agreed. And then there was this relief. We thought that was our answer, really, that relief was there, was a sign that this wasn't for us, because you need to be so committed to that journey. And I remember feeling, okay, that felt like our confirmation, but I also remember feeling really bad afterwards and thinking I'm now the person who turned down adoption, and that wasn't a nice person to be.
Well, we're part of a church community, always have been, and there's quite often messages and themes and conferences that really amplify the need for families to come forwards and to adopt, to foster children. So for us, coming out the other side of that decision, thinking that we're now one of those couples that could, but has said no to it. Yeah, that's a tough place to be, and to accept and to find your sort of peace with.
Yeah, who wants to be the person who turns down a child that needs a home? It feels that simple. But I think because we do a lot of research and because we look into these things and we chat to people, we knew a lot about what the actual journey could be like. And everyone we'd spoken to had such a desire and a passion to do it in the first place that had been what had guided them through the really tough times that had come following that. So I think that for us was a sign we don't have that there in the first place. And similar with IVF, we had no issues with IVF, but there were a lot of ethical things to consider with that, and weighing that up and looking across it as a whole. We worked out there was a chance that if we'd have had successful IVF treatments and had embryos that were fertilized but not had them implanted, either because we'd had all our shots in the NHS and we couldn't afford more, or for other reasons, there was a chance if we then donated those embryos, because we probably wouldn't have wanted to just bin them, someone else could have had those and been successful with them, which would have meant that someone had our biological children and we still didn't have any of our own. And when you weigh up all those kind of areas and the potential ifs of things that could happen, if you don't want to have any regrets, again, it gets very complicated. And for us, we didn't want to go down that route to that point. And looking back, because of some of the health stuff I've been through, potentially those kind of hormone injections could have set me on a very rocky path of some very nasty months, which would have potentially not even made me be able to be a mother early on in the way I'd have wanted to have been. So we have no regrets with our decisions, but they've been very difficult to make, and it's very hard to feel like you're not being judged. Sounds a bit hard, but I think people think if you didn't do IVF and you didn't do adoption, then you can't have been that desperate to be parents. And I want to get across to people that you can have a desire for these things and a real longing for them and a heartache for them, but not get to the point of desperation and just doing anything.
I can remember the restaurant evening very clearly. I think what's difficult when you're talking about this in a podcast is we're covering a lot of ground in a real short space of time, because this research, the studying, the conversations with parents, meeting people, reading up on stuff, researching the internet, visiting consultants, conferences, has all happened for us over maybe 7 or 8 years of time. So that's a long time where every day you're thinking independently, you're talking together, you have good days on it, bad days, you have weeks where all is well, and then a few weeks where you just question. So when it goes on for several years, it becomes a big deal. So that moment, like you mentioned, the restaurant where we both actually said to each other sort of separately, I'm not really feeling it. And then you could see that relief lift. It's like, wow, yeah, we need that. But it is really difficult.
And we're the kind of people, I think, who also we want to help other people, and we want to be positive, but not in a fake way. We want to give people hope. We want to show people that, things aren't the end of the world, and that it's possible to get strength and to get through them. And that's part of what, has motivated us to put this podcast together. But when you're that kind of person, you don't necessarily take time to stop and grieve, really, or really look at the things you're missing out on and trying to look at all the positives, try and look at the good stuff, thinking about what other people might think of us and what other people would like us to do. We knew if we'd said yes to adoption or IVF, we'd have made a lot of people very happy. Friends would have celebrated with us, family would have rejoiced, we might have been able to give our parents grandchildren. And you can see those moments, you can see how amazing that would be if you said yes to these things. And you want that, you really want that, but at the same time, you can't make decisions based on that. And I think that confuses it as well, because if we'd have been more selfish, if we'd have been people who only thought about us and what we wanted, then I think it would have been an easier process in a lot of ways.
It's been a fairly a unique journey. I think ours, even though, infertility, childlessness is not that uncommon, when you start talking to people and realizing actually most people know someone that's not got children or that's gone through a similar story. But I would say that what is quite unique about our journey is that we have said no to medical intervention through alternative ways of becoming parents. So that's quite unique. Probably in our experience, 8 out of 10 couples, have all tried some other form of intervention. We've got another couple, really good friends, who are very similar to us in their story, that it hasn't happened for them, and they've chosen not to go down the routes of medicinal help. Why do you think we haven't? How could you summarise why we have said no to adoption, fostering, sperm donor, IVF, surrogacy, any of that stuff? Why have we said no to that?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. And I worry about having to give people an answer when they ask me, because I don't feel like I've got one that sounds right. And I think the only thing I can tell you is just gut feeling of knowing when something is right or wrong. And I think people have that in life about a lot of things. You have it about people sometimes, and being in relationships, when you meet someone and you think this person on paper is perfect for me, but there's that gut feeling that this isn't right. It was just that feeling that I'm not sure that this is something that we should pursue that will benefit us. It might have given us a baby, but it might have just given us one. It was never just about let's get one baby or let's have a baby or let's get pregnant. And for some people that is it, and I can understand that as a female. It's weird to think you do your journey and your body doesn't do probably, half of what it's designed to do. But that wasn't it for us. It wasn't about let's just have those moments, amazing as they would have been and as much as we would have wanted them. It was more about the future unit. And I think a lot of the options we looked at, they could promise us a baby, potentially, maybe. I mean, the odds are still almost 50-50 with IVF, possibly worse for us. So you can't get your hopes up going into it anyway. It's a very difficult process on very different levels. It's a tough process. So I don't think it's one of those things. A lot of people over the years have said, oh, did you do IVF? Like it's just this one injection and you're done. And I think more people should understand what it is that they're actually saying to someone when they ask if they've done that. The same with adoption. When you say to someone, have you thought about adoption? Every couple who hasn't got children has thought about adoption. They've either dismissed it because they didn't want to straight away, or they've thought about it and decided not to, or they've gone ahead with it, not been successful, or they've gone ahead with it and been successful and started that journey, which is just as hard. I think for us, when we looked at everything, it was about that gut feeling. For me, I don't know what you would say.
Yeah, similar. I think for me, it's about that level of peace, and that's probably gut feeling. That's the same thing. So finding peace with it. Just for sake of alliteration, peace and partnership. We've always had such a good marriage, best friends, husband and wife. We've always had that huge blessing, really, of knowing that even if we don't do X and Y and Z, that we still have a great sort of a point to come back to, that we don't need X, Y and Z to keep us together or to give us a future. We know that we're really sort of happy with the future that we have with the two of us, if it is just us two. So I think the peace side of things, same to what you say, gut feeling, that's been really important for me. It was staggering how many times that we would explore a particular possible solution, and then one of us would be okay with it and the other wouldn't. And it's sort of staggering the amount of times that we'd just sort of say, if only one of us said, let's do this, the other would be right there and say, great, let's do it. I'm in it for you. But never did one of us say, I think we should try this.
No, not enough. We kind of thought, oh, I prefer this to this, but no path did either one of us ever say, I really want us to try this. And I think if we had have done, like you said, the other one would have been like, okay, let's do it. We just needed that certainty, because then if it goes wrong, you've got that feeling at the beginning of we wanted to try this. And I think there was just a different calling for us, and I'm hopeful that things like this is why, because we can talk to other people about it. And the amount of people I've been able to have really lovely conversations with who have lost something. It doesn't need to be childlessness. It can be anything. It can be loss of a child or a spouse or a sibling or a parent. And they're more open to chatting to me, and I can feel it because they know that I've got something missing in my life that I would have liked as well. And I love that I have that connection. If we'd have been through childlessness and then had the children and the happy family afterwards, which a lot of people, have, it's harder, I think, to then reconnect with people back in that place, because ultimately, the back of their head, they're thinking, well, you got what you wanted in the end anyway. So how do you know what it feels like to permanently be stuck in this place? So I think I have been grateful for that, and I can see our path as a two being more powerful to help other people than if we had moved ahead with other things. But we haven't taken it off the table.
Certainly with adoption and fostering, they are two options that don't disappear, like IVF or sort of trying naturally. So they remain options for the rest of our adult lives, certainly. I think I won't lie and say that I didn't have thoughts early on that actually being childless had a lot of sort of materialistic coups, like big grand holidays, posh cars, loads of time, energy. That thinking, wow, we're going to have such a lush life. It hasn't quite worked out like that for us.
No, and I think other people who have children and who are in the midst of that crazy family stage where they have no sleep and no time to shower and go to the toilet, I think there's a potential they could look at our life and think, wow, I'd like a little bit of that. But I would caution people on that whole grass is greener thing. And it's really important that you don't sometimes mistake quietness for peace with our situation. I think people look at us and think, oh, it must be lovely to have that quiet house and all that peace. And I want to say, well, actually, just because you're in a quiet house, it doesn't mean you've got peace.
That's a deep point, that is. A quiet house doesn't mean peace and contentment internally.
And the same with you could look at a family life. You could look at a mother with a new baby. I mean, how many people do we know that are childless that can't be around new babies and mums because that situation just looks too ideal, too lovely. And then you close the door and you've got that mother there sat on the floor crying because it's all so overwhelming. And again, don't look at that and think that's what I'm after. That's the ideal scenario. It's never what it seems.
Every day we write down in a sort of short prayer form, but we write down something that we're thankful for. And there is so much of our lives currently, in our early 40s now, that we are grateful for. And we do recognise, having a quieter house, having more time, having more sleep than maybe some of our friends that have other priorities. But how much of that would you swap? Or there are times where you think, if only I would swap this for the future with the children to look after me, or the celebrations of events and milestones and markers where your children grow up and you can watch that. Having so many of our friends and family members that their priorities, their life becomes just sort of the children, and just getting from 0 to 18, just doing everything with the children. That's the main thing. That's the big deal. That's what we put our lives on hold for. Yeah, I'd like a piece of that sometimes.
Yeah, but then we could also be guilty of making that look like it's all amazing, and there'll be someone maybe listening to this that's got older children and they're not seeing them at all. But I think they're the bits that I find hardest to watch on TV, I think, and to see in life. It's when someone is called mum. It's when a child runs to the mother because they're looking for someone to be around. It's that kind of early unconditional love connection with something or someone that is just, I don't know, it's just that fulfilling in some way. And when you hear people talk about, these moments in raising kids that make it all worthwhile, you just think, I know you probably get a very few of them compared to the stress and the hassle and the nagging and the anxiety and stuff. But, to not have any of those at all in your life, where someone calls you mum, or you watch a child walk for the first time, or you give birth and you see your child, or you see your husband holding your baby, or all those things, to not have those at all, you're missing out.
Certainly for you, with one of your love languages being touch, and we were talking about this just a couple of weeks ago, and I think you got a little bit emotional then because we were reflecting on having our dog going back probably for 4 or 5 years, and how the dog would just come to you and would show happiness and love and a desire to be with you. And, we do that for each other, obviously. But sometimes that extra person, that extra party where someone just desires to be with you, or something desires to be with you. And I think that's when for me, some of the moments where it sort of punches me in the heart is where I see a sort of a child reaching out to a parent, and you just think, I don't know what that feels like. I always thought I would know what it feels like to have a little child reach for your hand, or want to be held by you, or want to be carried by you. I think they're the moments for me now where I feel like, I want to know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And you can try and get that with your pets, and you do get that with pets to a level, particularly a pet like a dog that shows you sort of compassion and loyalty. Not compassion, companionship.
That's a unique dog, that is, right
brings you
there.
a tissue when you cry, pats you on the head. What do you think have been the moments, or can you remember a moment when you've been really encouraged to make a decision, or that you've been sort of lifted up towards progress on this journey that we're talking about? Some of the good things that have inspired you or motivated you towards making decisions. I think I'll mention one while you think, which is just our line in the sand. I think that's a really important milestone that we took some time to get to. We'd been for 2 or 3 years to an annual conference that for us thankfully was held not too far from home, held every year for those facing childlessness and fertility. And we'd been to that for a few years. And in one conversation with somebody that we met there, just mentioned to us about drawing a line in the sand and getting to that point where you literally draw a line in the ground and you cross over it and you leave behind your decisions and say, right, enough, we're bringing to an end all that discussion, thought, exploration, and we're moving forwards.
When we arrived at that year, it was a particular burden, I think, on us. We got to a point where it was just, I remember I felt I didn't know how to live anymore with this, not knowing where life was going. Were we just going to be a two and try and have holidays and try and enjoy the freedom of not having children? Or were we going to have a family? And when you live every day not knowing, are you going to get pregnant? Is this going to happen? It's just exhausting. I'd had enough of not knowing which way life would go. And I remember just feeling like it was a burden. And one of the other women there said to me, I don't want to lose hope. I don't want to let go of hope. And I remember saying to her, yeah, I get that. But for me, that hope is just a burden. And I just don't think I can carry it anymore. And so in chatting to this couple who had been through all the options and ended up as a two anyway, we were chatting and I remember they said to us, have you drawn a line in the sand? And I remember us being like, no. And just knowing that that was what we needed to do. And it felt so final. It was a scary thought. But at the same time, there was this real sort of good feeling of, this is the next step for us. This is what we have to do. It's the only way we can move forward.
Interestingly, yes, I think we both had that same instant reaction literally on the day, thinking, yes, that's what we need to do. But I think also sort of stage one was, where are we in regards to that line now? We weren't in the same place.
No, that's true.
I was further away from that line. I think we could both see it, but you were quite close to being able to say, yes, let's step over it. And I'm like, well, I've still got a little way to go before we get to the line.
Yeah.
So I think there was then a few more months of just realigning ourselves, thinking about, what do we need to do to get to the line before we even get to the point of crossing over it. And then actually came the moment when we did that, and we knew we had a holiday booked in the Canary Islands, and we thought, let's use this opportunity.
I think we already had it booked, so we were like, okay, well, we're going to actually be on a beach, so let's use that sand and make that our line in the sand.
So, I had to pull you out of bed because you were really unwell, and we knew this was our sort of last opportunity to do this, and you were really keen, but really struggling with this 48, 72-hour virus of sorts. So you were like, we need to do this. I need to push through this. And so we took our notebooks and we went and sat down in this cove on the coast. This was in Lanzarote. And we drew a line in the sand and then we sat down behind it and wrote down on our notebooks what?
Well, I actually got it pinned to my noteboard in the study. The exact piece of paper we wrote on.
Have you?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever...
I'll go and get it.
Go and get it. I don't think I've ever actually reread that.
9th of March 2018. Things we leave behind. I'm not going to read all of them because there's loads. So the confusion, feeling like we should be doing anything. The name that we picked out, dreams of being parents, being pregnant, our parents being grandparents, aunts and uncles for family, no cousins for nieces and nephews, so, not being part of that unit. The belief that we're missing out, fitting into the parent club, needing others to understand our decision. I remember that was quite key for us. Telling other people that we're expecting, just having some good news, support from children later on, family Christmases, and just seeing little versions of us is a lot of stuff.
You've always loved that I've got big ears.
Yeah.
And you'd always said that you'd love to have a boy with big ears.
I'd love to have had a boy with big ears, and I wanted one of those little boys that would go to school wearing bow ties and, you know, and suits and stuff, and very much their own little person. But I always like the idea of having a child that's older than his years.
But it's something, you know, joking aside, that you leave behind. I think that's not going to happen, as far as I can see.
You need to get past it. If you don't leave this stuff behind when you do like a crossing the line moment, then how are you going to kind of move forward? There is a point when you have to say, that's not going to be us anymore. It's not going to be what happens.
These were all written under the heading things we leave behind the line. There's probably about 30 things on this list. I'm just having a look now. But then we also really importantly wrote things ahead. You know, we obviously need to step into our future. And so we then listed some of the things we'd be stepping into. There's fewer things on this list.
It's a lot fewer. And I remember it being really hard to come up with them as well, because we just didn't know what was ahead that could even compare to what we'd left behind.
So enjoying others' children, resources, energy, time, money, having more of those things, fulfilling our potential, opportunity, holidays, sort of obviously different types of holidays that we've always enjoyed.
Yeah.
Like adult-only holidays and things like that.
And I remember we were getting desperate to find things, but they felt so materialistic compared to the stuff we were leaving behind, which felt meaningful and deep and emotional and relational. They felt very much like, is this the life I want?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, one of the things we've listed here under the things ahead heading is acknowledging grief.
Interesting.
Which is sort of, 11 years later, here we are now doing a podcast where we're sort of exploring the theme of grief and looking at all these different losses, because we're acknowledging grief in many, many forms.
Yeah.
And peace. One of the big ones, obviously, under the things ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was so important that most of our decisions were made on the basis of gut feelings, because we had peace about our decisions, hard as they were.
What does that mean? To have peace about these decisions? What does that feel like? What does it look like?
I think it's different for everybody. For me, I've always been a very much no regrets. I look at the options ahead of me. I don't want regrets about my life. So if I think I'm going to regret not doing that at some point, or if I can see a possible regret, then I want to look at that and do it and not have that regret. And for things like IVF, when we weighed them up, the regrets of IVF would have been if we'd have pushed ahead and something bad had happened during the pregnancy, something bad had happened during the birth. If our marriage had split because of it, if looking back, with my hormone condition, if I'd have had those IVF drugs, I don't know what kind of person it would have made me. I don't know what that would have done to our relationship. They would have been regrets I would not have been able to live with easily, because, I pushed ahead with this and now this has happened. Maybe we should never have done IVF. It was weighing them up. The regrets of not doing it, not having children, but there's lots of other ways to have children. So for me, I have peace in that. I think when we make decisions, we've looked at everything, and we've not just looked at the now, we've looked at the long term. When we say no to something, it's with complete peace that we looked at everything, and we know what we're turning down.
And in a really good partnership, it's finding that peace for yourself, but almost to an overflow that you can help it in the other as well. So I can go extra lengths to try and make sure, that we're still aligned. And if you're in a different place, that can help bring us back together. If I'm in a different place, you can help bring us back together.
Yeah.
So you've got enough of that overflow to be able to help somebody else. And I think having that peace minimises, it doesn't get rid of, but it minimises the pain in some of those situations where you can be reminded, or you can suddenly be taken by surprise. Yes, sadness can remain, but the pain doesn't lead to bitterness and resentment and anger. I think the sadness may always be there, but it's a mild bruise rather than a deep sort of flesh wound.
For me, it creates a safer environment to grieve in. So I feel safe to grieve and feel sad for that because I have peace in our situation. If I didn't have peace, I worry that grief and that sadness would just spiral into anger, into depression, into frustration, into lashing out at others. And I would worry where that stops. I don't think I'd be able to contain it. But because I have peace in our decisions, I feel like I can grieve safely in that as deeply as I need to, and not let it get to a place of regrets and all that kind of nasty stuff that can really take you down if you let it.
Do you think you will ever finish grieving it?
No. I don't think so. I think if it had been a one-off event, and to be honest, even talking to people we've spoken to already, I'm trying to think what is a one-off event when it comes to grief. Although we have spoken to someone, when Sue said she felt like she had grieved her marriage, and there was a point where she woke up and she knew there's a new chapter ahead. But there's still times that are hard, and I think, for me, I don't think it will change because I feel like I'm constantly being faced with new things. So, our friends have babies. The minute they start school, the minute they start doing homework, the minute they start actually discussing their feelings and talking with their parents and connecting with them and, that sort of level, I'll grieve that again. There won't be someone in my life doing that. When they have teenagers and kids in their 20s who are, just chatting to them like adults, I'll grieve that. When they have grandchildren, I'll grieve not having grandchildren. I see it ongoing. Not in a way that will affect my life, to derail it. I don't want it to ever do that. But it will constantly have an impact that I think I will be just grieving a little bit. And I think it's just part of who you are, like we talked about with Sue Brain on episode 1. You incorporate it into who you are. And it goes with you. It's that companion. And you get to the point where you're okay with that. That's my journey. And everybody has something similar. I'm not under the illusion that that's unique. People who haven't got a good dad figure, people who haven't got a mum, people who haven't, ever had children, people who've never met the right person to get married if they're single, people who are missing out on some physical ability that separates them. Whatever it is, everybody's got something that makes them feel different at some time or grieve something they wish they had.
The reminders will never go away. They'll just change over time.
Yeah.
And as we've got older, into our early 40s, we have family members and friends who are elderly, and we've seen how families change and care more and look after those that are older in the family group. And so things like that are reminders that we didn't have in our early 20s, but here we are now thinking, well, who's going to do that for me? If we're in a care home together, who's going to visit us? Who's going to send us cards? And we don't know, and that's the unknown. You have to be quite careful about not staying in that place of wondering, because there's no end to that, is there? You'll just be wondering forever.
I think the reality is family life is too chaotic, and there's not enough time and space for families to incorporate people like us as well. It just doesn't really work like that, and I think that's been another grief, really, because you had this expectation of, actually, well, maybe it'll look like this, maybe it'll be okay, because this and this will happen. But actually that's not been our experience. So I think it's made us very mindful of other people on the fringes of things. So, I think we really treasure our single friends, and I would always want them to feel like our family was open for them as much as they ever needed it, because we have that time that we can give to that. And if people we know go through things that are really hard that maybe they can't process in the family unit, then I'd like to think that we can be support networks for them and use that time wisely. I really want to be of use to other people who maybe are also going through a similar stage of life where friends are just settling down and having families, and it just takes up a lot of time and energy. So maybe they've lost that friendship, and that's somewhere we can help and provide that.
I wonder if there are any aspects of the journey, or even where you are now, that I don't know about. And are there any aspects of the journey for me that you don't know about?
Well, I think because we talk a lot, we process stuff together a lot, because that's part of what you have to do, really. I don't think there's much that I haven't verbalised to you in some shape or form. I think, you still get thoughts, but they're not new to you, that, that I would have. When people say, oh, my wife's amazing, she gave me this child and stuff, I think I'm never going to have that. I mean, there's literally nothing on the planet I could do to equal that. I can't make up for it with a nice holiday or a new car. It just doesn't work that way. So I think that those moments that you just cannot replicate in any other way, I think they'll always be a bit sort of hard to face and hear people talk about. But I don't think that's particularly new to you, I think. No, I've said that to you over the years, so what about you?
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all about where I'm at, how I feel, how I've felt in the last 12 months that you're not aware of. I think we're both really open books. We talk about it easily. We go to that place, we go to a place of vulnerability quite quickly. I think we have enough reminders in couples that we know, we see, don't we, where sometimes there's one part of that partnership that's not quite there, that's not quite in the same place as the other. One might be willing to talk, the other quickly shuts it down, which just is a reminder to me to make sure that we keep aligning ourselves and making sure that we're on the same page and checking in that quite regularly. literally like every 6 months. Where are you with stuff? Just a simple question. Any thoughts, any feelings, anything changed? Let's talk about it. Let's make some time to actually think about it and reflect about it.
And that was a priority for us early on in our marriage. And even when we found out about not having children from day one, we wanted to talk to people about it. We wanted people to ask questions. We never wanted it to be anyone wondering, why haven't they? We were always willing to talk about it. Unfortunately, it's not a subject that people feel comfortable talking about. And we very quickly worked out, no matter how open you are, it doesn't mean other people will. So I don't think it's been something that a lot of people have asked us about in the depth that they would like to, which is partly why the second section is questions from other people, because we wanted them to anonymously put in questions and say, ask us, what do you want to know about the situation that you wouldn't want to ask us to our face or you would find a bit awkward? The conversations we're having now are conversations we have every day like this. We're just open people, and we wouldn't be sticking this on a podcast if we found this awkward. So, yeah. I think because we're so open in communication, we've made that decision to be like that. That has helped our journey and at least kept us together in it and not kind of, crying in a corner, wishing the other one had any idea what we were going through. Just to add in that 2 years ago I had a hysterectomy because of my hormone condition, which was something called PMDD, which I will talk about at some point on the podcast, but was another loss and another permanent thing of me coming to terms with the fact that actually physically now I can't have children, which is still a weird thing I have to say to myself every now and then. That was another thing that just underlined our line in the sand that this wouldn't happen naturally. Yeah, it's getting better, but now I'm sorting out HRT and stuff, so it's been probably the last 4 or 5 years of trying to sort that out, work out what was happening and why I wasn't functioning as I wanted to, and that, complicates it all over again, because on days when I'm not feeling great like that, then the whole child thing can become a much bigger issue in my head than it actually is when I'm feeling normal.
And that has been something that's sort of unfurled as you've been trying different treatments and different things to get on top and just to try and be normal. So every bit of help with medication, injections has all been, I just want to feel normal. And so, that obviously feeds into the considerations for children, because you think something like IVF, where you're absolutely ramping your hormones up artificially and making your body produce stuff that it would never produce without the medicinal help. It's a little bit more scary when you're thinking, how on earth am I going to deal with this?
Because we just don't know what that would have looked like. Whether we'd have got the baby or not, I don't know what my mental health and my physical health would have looked like alongside that. And you put in lack of sleep and a baby screaming, and that just, who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Let's summarise where we're at, and then let's think about some of those questions. Married for how long?
16 years.
16 years, together for nearly 20 years. 11 years ago, found out that the infertility thing was a thing for us to consider, look at, explore, be tested for. And here we are 11 years after that. Childlessness sort of is our story. No children, didn't follow any medical intervention, and as yet haven't pursued adoption or fostering. We've reached the point where we threw it open to questions friends had submitted, and these guys didn't hold back.
Questions like, how do you feel when people close to you continue to have babies?
Are there any surprising triggers for your grief?
How do you find ways to fill the gaps left by childlessness?
How do you deal with the insensitive questions graciously?
And because this section was so good
and long,
we split the episode into 2. So part 2 is being released next week, and you won't want to miss it, because we're honest, we're open, and we're keen to share.
But for part 1, thank you for listening to The Silent Why. Don't forget to check out Claire's weekly blogs and short My Why episodes, which launch this Friday, as she personally reflects on different areas of grief and loss.
You can find out pretty much everything you need to know about us at thesilentwhy.com or through the show notes.
And if you want to get in touch, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us through the website.
Today, we're finishing with some words from John Calipari, an American basketball coach. It's not about working hard. It's about working together. You have to care more about the team than you do about yourself.